Hello, my friend. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Ellen, and I am a burnout and stress management coach. And if you are not here, welcome back. Today, if you are a high achiever, if you are somebody who tends to be very go, 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 today's video is for you. I also have a companion blog and a podcast that go along with this. So pick your poison in terms of how you like to consume content. But today we're going to be talking all about why do we struggle with rest? Where does that come from? Because for some of us, sitting still, it's like pulling teeth. We don't rest well. We don't do silence well. We don't know how to function when our to-do lists aren't filled to the brim. And this is something I really want to talk about going into, what for a lot of us is downtime. What for a lot of us is perhaps the one time of year where we really feel like we can hit the pause button in terms of our productivity and our achievement and our accomplishment. Maybe as we head into the holiday season and we head into Christmas and New Year's, you have a lot of social commitments going on. But this is really to address that this is meant to be a time for us to slow down. And yet for so many of us, we struggle with it. I get it. Like I said in a previous blog, a previous podcast, I think I even posted a YouTube video about it. I'm honestly not sure. I lose track of what content I post where, but I used to be exactly the same way when it came to my approach to silence. And when I say rest, I'm not just talking about recovering from your workouts. It's important to have recovery from our lives in general. And that's really what I'm talking about today. A lack of rest may be exactly why we're so exhausted all the time. I have also posted a previous blog about that, the different types of rest and why we might need them. But in this video in particular, I want to address some of the reasons why we might be struggling to rest and some specific tips that we can implement in our lives to make sure we're getting the rest that we need. So let's go ahead and dive in. Now, first and foremost, we might struggle with rest because we think we can get more done if we don't rest. For so many of us, that is the reason why we don't rest enough. What we're forgetting though, is that rest helps us to get more done. There is so much evidence and so much science out there. I'm a former scientist. There's so much out there that says the necessity of rest and taking mental breaks and giving ourselves mental downtime to help us make better decisions, be more creative, be more innovative. We only have so much mental bandwidth. And for most of us, we exceed that in our workday. We are pushing ourselves too hard. I've actually dove into the science behind my all-time favorite mindfulness techniques, which I'll go ahead and drop in the description below. I did that a while ago, but in a nutshell, things like meditation are actually tremendously beneficial when it comes to our brain. So stop fooling yourself into thinking that rest is a bad thing for productivity, because it's not. There's a reason why the Pomodoro technique, which is probably one of the most famous and most recommended and cited productivity tactics on earth, is 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, because we can't focus for longer than that. And if you are somebody who can focus for longer than that, and there are those of us out there, you need to give yourself a longer reprieve. We need to mentally recover for longer. It's 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, or 50 minutes on, 10 minutes off. The more you focus, the longer of a break you need. And yet for so many of us, we're not giving ourselves that break. So what are some tips if that is something that applies to you? If you're somebody who feels like you shouldn't rest because you can get more done if you don't, what are some things you can try? Well, one of my tips is to utilize pockets of rest time. Maybe you don't want to rest for 4 hours or something, but just like the Pomodoro technique, rest does not have to be long to be effective. Instead, you can rest for 5 minutes here or 5 minutes there and still get tremendous benefits from doing so. I'm also going to talk a little bit later about being more intentional with your rest. And basically what that means is knowing yourself well enough to recognize the type of rest that you need. Again, I have done a podcast and a blog previously about the different types of rest that I will go ahead and link below as well. They're also linked in the companion blog that goes with this YouTube. So that is the first thing. Utilize pockets of rest time. The other big thing is don't force yourself to quote unquote earn rest. I actually did a reel on Instagram a while ago. It's probably the most viral I've ever gone on Instagram, where first thing I said was stop feeling the need to justify rest, to stop feeling the need to justify. And I think in the reel, I used the word laziness, but really for some of us, we think any resting is laziness. Stop feeling the need to justify that, because frankly, simply getting up, going to work and doing your job entitles you to rest. So many of us are knowledge workers. We do intellectual work, not physical work. And that requires as much, if not more, rest than physical work does. It's just a different kind of rest. So don't force yourself to earn it. You earn it purely by showing up and doing your work. So another big reason why so many of us struggle with rest is we define ourselves by our productivity and what we get done. This is straight up achiever. This is, if you are an Enneagram 3, this is exactly why you think this way, because this is the straight up achiever in all of us, the part of our brain that says our day isn't quote unquote good enough if we didn't get the maximum amount of stuff done. It's the hustle culture and mentality that's ingrained in so many of us, especially if you're American, that especially even as business owners, even as business owners, sometimes we struggle with, if we didn't work a 9 to 5, we didn't have a good day. But that's like the perk of having your own business, is that you don't have to do that. But, beyond that, if you work for corporate, you will sometimes judge what you get done outside of your workday. I didn't maximize getting as many, errands done as I could have, or things around the house done as I could have. And then we judge our day for not being good enough because we didn't fill it to the brim as much as possible. See, I firmly believe that for most of us, it's not about having the time to rest, not at all. Instead, it's about whether we let ourselves rest in our life. That's probably the biggest hang-up that most of us have, is we're not letting ourselves rest. For most of us achievers, our productivity and our level of accomplishment is a defining part of our personality. And I think there's a fear there that if we let ourselves slack off, we start to question our varied identity. And that sounds extreme, but we do, especially if we are trying to make a lifestyle shift away from working so much. We have spent so long defining so much of our identity on the level of productivity and achievement and accomplishment in our lives that we don't know who we are without those things. I tell a lot of my clients, as a burnout and stress management coach, tell a lot of my clients, we are breaking decades worth of bad habits here. And that's exactly what it is in this scenario too. We are breaking decades worth of habits that we probably had since we were teenagers, of overcommitting and overworking and overfilling our lives, because that is just how we define ourselves. And I'm guilty of it too. No judgment if this is you, because I'm guilty of this too as well. So what can we do about it? What are some tips that we can implement here? First and foremost, look for other ways to define yourself. We wrap up too much of our identity in our work, in our accomplishment, in the number of things we check off of your to-do list. And you're just so much more than that. So think about the other qualities or characteristics or roles that you play that you're proud of. For example, I'm not just a burnout coach. I'm a professional tutor, and I'm very, very proud of the work that I do with my students. I'm also a fierce friend. I'm a loving aunt. I have no desire to have kids, but I love my nephews. I am sassy and passionate. I'm very athletic. Sometimes we used to say, oh, I'm a former athlete. Hell no, I'm not a former athlete. I am an athlete. I am goofy and ridiculous. I'm musical and creative. I love to paint. I love to play the piano. I'm an artist and a musician. You have lots of facets to yourself, but when we over-identify with one facet of ourselves, particularly our work and our productivity, that's when it starts to cause problems. So that's one tip here, is to look for other ways to define yourself. And then another tip here is to establish a resting ritual or wind down routine. Maybe you recognize this about yourself. Maybe you know that you over-identify with how much you get done and you really want to change, but you're really, really struggling to switch gears at the end of the day. Well, that usually happens for a lot of us because we expect ourselves to go from go, 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 get all the shit done mentality to just stopping. And it's just not practical. We need to wind ourselves down. You can do this at lunch and you can do it at the end of the day, but developing some sort of a ritual or a routine to do that, to wind yourself down, to get yourself to switch gears, to tie up loose ends, whatever it might be, so that you wrap up your day before you rest. That is something I think a lot of us can implement. So we've talked so far about, and I am glancing off of some notes so I don't forget things. We've talked so far about, we think we can't rest because we think we get more done if we don't. And we struggle to rest because we define ourselves by our productivity and what we get done. And for both of those, we've talked about utilizing pockets of time for rest instead of extended periods of time, not forcing ourselves to earn rest, looking for other ways to define ourselves, and establishing a resting ritual or wind down ritual so that we're not expecting ourselves to literally switch gears like a light switch. Another big reason why so many of us struggle to rest is because we fear silence, boredom, and stillness. I wrote another blog, which I've linked in the companion blog, but I'm also going to put in the description below because I think it's important, about how I used to not like silence. I actually also think I have this in a YouTube video, so I'll probably link that down below too. But in this, I talk about how for most of us, busyness is a distraction. We distract ourselves with busyness, whether that busyness and that, that noise is literally music or TV that you constantly have in the background, or just menial tasks around your house or menial work-related tasks. Those things serve as wonderful distractions because, frankly, most of us aren't comfortable with being alone or in quiet. And the reason why we're not comfortable is because we don't like where our brains go when it's quiet or when we're bored. We don't like the insecurities or fears or concerns that start to come up to the surface. Hell, I am actually a firm believer that many of us overwork, not necessarily because, we're high achieving, even though we are, or because our companies force us to. I think a lot of us overwork because we're numbing and avoiding things. Now, you might disagree with that. I'd be interested in hear your thoughts in the comments, and keep it civil. But I think a lot of us are numbing and avoiding things. Think about it. Why do you always feel the need to have your hands busy? Why do you turn on the TV or radio every single time you're in a quiet environment, even though you don't pay attention to it? I do it too. Like, I'm not shaming anybody. I do this too. This is something I'm actively working on. If you watched my recent weekly review video, I talk about how I never get sensory rest, or I've been struggling to get it recently. That's what this is. It is filling any quiet in your life with noise and with distractions. I struggle with it too. Absolutely. So why do we do that? Where are we afraid of our brain going? And I think it's a big reason that we don't like quiet, because we don't like where our brains go in silence. Maybe it's not even silence for you. Maybe it's just inactivity. You don't like where your brain goes when you don't have something else to distract it. That, I think, is a big thing for a lot of us. And some tips here is, first and foremost, accept your anxiety. Don't fight it. Just reframe it. Like we've already touched on, that anxiety is coming from someplace. Maybe you don't fully understand what it is yet. And maybe you do need to do some therapy or some just self-exploration to figure out what that is. But there is some sort of insecurity or feeling that you are avoiding. So instead of focusing on, I'm anxious or I don't like how this feels, what can you focus on instead? Can you focus instead on what you do like? Can you focus instead on what thing you might be avoiding? Because even though it's uncomfortable, that awareness is an incredibly powerful thing. So much of what I do as a coach is really about building that awareness in my clients so that they can self-coach, so they don't need me for the rest of their life. That's my goal. So accept your anxiety. Don't fight it. Befriend it, really, and reframe it. Another big tip here is build up to it. If you don't like silence or boredom or inactivity, I do not and never recommend going cold turkey. That is never my recommendation. It's just like with meditation. I will never recommend somebody to start meditating and do 15 minutes at a time. I recommend starting with 2 to 5 minutes. It can be the same thing when we're talking about silence or stillness or rest. Start with 2 minutes. Again, that pockets of rest that we talked about before, and then build up. So that's another big tip here. And then this kind of relates to what I said before, be intentional with your rest time. This can be something that you can tie in with the last one. If we're building up to it, be very, very intentional with the activities that you do, because sometimes it's not about spending a lot of time resting. Sometimes it's about less time, but more intention, which can give us better rest. Maybe it's not about resting for 3 hours in the evening. Maybe it's just about giving yourself 10 or 15 minutes to decompress in your dark, quiet car before you come inside your family. That can be a very, very powerful, but also very succinct form of rest. So those are some tips there if you really just fear or avoid silence because you're trying to numb. Our next reason why, which is our last reason why, is you're a perfectionist and you feel the need to spend your time perfectly. Now, I'm never one to vilify social media. I think social media is powerful. I think it is very educational. I've met some incredible people through social media, but I do think that this is the one place where social media does us a disservice. Not the one place, but I think it is a place where social media does us a disservice. Because for some of us, we struggle to rest because we feel the need to spend our time, quote unquote, perfectly. There are so many cultural inputs that we all experience and perfectly curated social media feeds that imply and churn up an insecurity in us that we're not doing enough with our time. There's that mom who creates, and I know I've seen this somewhere, she creates like these perfect bento box lunches. So maybe you as a mom feel the need to do that too, because that's what a good mom does. Maybe it's the business owner who prides themselves and gloats about the fact that they answer every DM within 30 minutes. So you feel like to be a good business owner, you need to do that. Or maybe there's the person who always seems to go on the most amazing, exotic adventures, and you feel like your weekend off under a cozy blanket painting by the fire isn't quote unquote enough. There is a lot of content out there that, if we're susceptible to it, can make us feel like we're not doing enough and that we need to do more, which runs counter to our desire to rest, and it makes total sense. So if this is something that you're getting caught up in, some tips here are to change the content that you're consuming. If there's somebody that you're following that's triggering you, maybe you need to stop following them. And I don't think, cancel culture, or this like cut and dry, oh, just stop following them is always the answer. I think it is worth asking ourselves, kind of similar to the last thing, trying to understand what that trigger is. What is the thing that you're trying to avoid? Because if we just ignore it and shove it down, it's going to continue to haunt us. But if we start to understand it, we can make changes. We can make changes, yes, but we can also still just decrease those inputs that we're getting that are making us feel not enough. But probably the biggest tip I have here is to ask yourself, what would actually relax you? You see the perfectly curated content, you see the perfect vacations and the trips and the perfect lunch boxes and dinners. And my cousin, his wife, she takes her kids on these like epic adventures and she posts about it all the time. And it's very easy to see that and feel like you quote unquote should be doing it because it looks so good. But ask yourself, does that sound like something you'd enjoy? Does that sound restful and relaxing to you? Because maybe it doesn't. I had a training last week, and in it, the trainer asked a very powerful question. Do you want the process, or do you just want the outcome? Because if you want the outcome and getting there doesn't sound fun, that's a good way to call BS on yourself, because you're probably getting caught up in the hype. So ask yourself what would actually relax you, and maybe bring in that secondary question of, do you want the process or do you just want the outcome? Some final tips for overcoming resistance to resting that aren't really related to any of the reasons why we struggle to rest are to be consistent. I think resting is like working out for a lot of us as achievers, which might seem like a very, very weird parallel to draw because they seem so opposite, but I make it because it's a lot easier to fall out of a routine of prioritizing rest than it is to get into one. It's a lot easier to fall out if you're inconsistent with it. So we've got to develop that consistency. And I think it starts by doing some of the other stuff we talked about, by looking for the pockets of rest, and also by just focusing on being very intentional and building up our rest tolerance, starting with little 5-minute chunks and then building up to longer periods of rest. I also think it's very powerful to schedule rest. I recorded a reel on Instagram not too long ago about something I do to make certain that things become a priority in my calendar. And what I do is I schedule them. Workouts are scheduled in my calendar. I even have time in my calendar that I started adding recently to decompress. So I didn't work right up until I went to bed. And I think the point behind this isn't to be perfect with when you schedule things. Like, I'm moving stuff in my calendar around all the time, especially things that I blocked out, like my workouts and my rest. But I think when we can visually see something taking up space in our lives, we're more likely to actually make the space to do it. So I'm sure I could keep going with all of this, but these are my tips when it comes to if you struggle with rest. Ooh, I just hit my desk. If you struggle with rest, these are some of the things I recommend doing. And these are some of the things I recommend keeping in mind as we head into this time of year where it can be so easy to do the exact opposite of perhaps what we want this time to be spent for. It can be so easy to get caught up in personal projects and work projects and side hustle projects, when in fact, maybe this is the time that you really, really do need to protect with your life to make sure you slow down and you rest. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this sucker up because it's already been a little bit longer than I intended it for it to be. But I would love to hear, what are your thoughts? What are your comments? Did you hear anything in here that you fundamentally agree with or maybe fundamentally disagree with? And if you enjoyed what you heard, don't forget to hit that like and that subscribe button to hear a little bit more on this, because this is a topic that I am very, very passionate about. As always, check out the companion blog. And if this is something you feel like you need support with, now is a great time to join my burnout and stress management membership. You can check out the link in the description below, but it is not only going to help you get more productive, maybe introduce you to Notion and get you started there, but also give you strategies, techniques, and accountability and support to really take back your life from burnout and stress and start creating that stress-proof and anti-burnout lifestyle for yourself. Prices for the membership are going to go up in the new year. So if that's something you're curious about or interested in, I highly recommend getting involved now. But with that, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.